Hello, everybody. We apologize for this. We ran into a few technical difficulties, yeah. So bit of a delay, but we can still move forward. So let me sort of reiterate what I said when the sound wasn't working. My name is Joe Rochford, and I'm the director of the integrated program in neuroscience here at McGill. And just to give you an overview of what we're hoping to accomplish today is to sort of give you an overview of McGill, the McGill community, the Montreal community, the program proper, some tips in terms of how you can apply, what the requirements are, and then effectively what our program is like, the structure, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, at the end of my presentation, which hopefully won't last more than 45 minutes, although my wife keeps telling me that I have a tendency of rambling, as I'm doing right now. So I'll try and avoid doing that. But at the end, if you have any more specific questions that we didn't address in the presentation, I'd be more than happy to discuss those. So Alex, can we have the first slide, please? Next slide.
Just give me 1 second.
Okay, so one of the things about our program is that it's probably the biggest program, a neuroscience program in Canada, if not in North America and the world. And the reason for that is because we're literally one program that assumes multiple departments. Literally anyone who is doing anything related to sort of brain function and structure research-wise is a member of the integrated program in neuroscience and can serve as a graduate supervisor for you. So you can see on the PowerPoint that we span almost every possible domain that you can think of in the area of neuroscience, and we span almost every department that we could think of that might be doing some work related to sort of neuroscience. So we have members from the Department of Psychiatry, from psychology, from molecular biology, cell anatomy, a whole variety of different courses of programs. And okay, and so we go from cellular, molecular, all the way up to systems, and in fact we touch also on sort of psychiatric disorders and of course neurological disorders. So we currently have over 350 students registered in our program, and we currently have over 225 active supervisors. So again, I'm just mentioning this to sort of illustrate the point and emphasize the point that when we call ourselves the integrated program, we really are integrated. Next slide, please, Alex. So let me tell you a little something about the university. So McGill was founded over 100 years ago, and we currently are ranked sort of 32nd as the most impressive, or the most, what's the ranking?
32nd.
We're ranked 32nd in terms of research universities across the world. A quarter of the students who are currently at McGill are from outside of Canada. So the States, Europe, we have a number of people from the Far East, the Middle East, and from Africa. 23% of our student population consists of graduate students, and we have the highest percentage of PhD students of any Canadian research university. And effectively, a lot of that comes from sort of neuroscience, because McGill has a strong and proud history of neuroscience. So effectively, I'm speaking to you today at the Montreal Neurological Institute, and for those of you who might know a little bit about the history of neuroscience, that was founded by Wilder Penfield back in the 1930s, and Dr. Penfield was started perhaps the first really world-renowned and influential neuroscientist, again, historically. But we have a number of very famous current or former McGill alumni who have distinguished themselves in research. So many of you are probably familiar with the work of Brenda Milner, whose study of the case of HM really led to the identification of the hippocampus as a major, player in the field of memory. And I could run off 3 or 4 others. So there's Don Hebb, there's Ronald Melzack, who distinguished himself in pain. I won't go through the list because you probably are aware of that. But just to let you know that we have and continue to have a really strong interest and priority in terms of developing and working and innovating in the area of neuroscience. McGill also has 10 different sort of institutes or research centers that are specifically dedicated to conducting research in the neurosciences. So my main home base is in an area at a hospital that's called the Douglas Hospital, which is just down the road from here. That's where my research lab is located, and that institute is the research center there, does some very fine neuroscience research, primarily related to sort of psychiatric disorders. Here at the MNI, it's more related to neurological disorders, at least from a clinical perspective. But again, we run the gamut from sort of bench to bedside. Okay, so. Okay. Next slide, please, Alex.
Slideshow's not working apparently.
Oh, no. Okay, well, we're trying to fix the technical difficulties, and again, I apologize for that. Let me tell you a little bit about Montreal, which where McGill is located. Montreal is also a center for neuroscience in the sense that we have, in Montreal proper, we have 4 different universities, and each of those 4 universities has a very strong sort of neuroscience departments and research programs. In addition to that, one of the nice things about Montreal, and I have to confess there's a bit of a bias here because I'm a native Montrealer, is effectively that it's really got a high sort of quality of living. We have some of the lowest housing costs in North America. So rents here for incoming students are, relatively affordable compared to other cities in Canada. You also have the advantage here of Montreal this is really a bilingual city. So if you're interested in, if your mother tongue is French and you're interested in sort of picking up on some English, you can do that here. And if your mother tongue is English and you're interested in picking up some French, you can do that here as well. The other wonderful thing about the city is that, we're very culturally strong and vibrant. We have a very strong music and art community here. We have many festivals in the summer, sometimes too many. We have a comedy festival, we have a film festival, we have, what are some of the other ones we have, Alex?
The Grand Prix.
We have the Grand Prix, the Formula One Grand Prix that comes in. It's just, if you're interested in sort of after-hour things to do for entertainment, Montreal is the place to come to, because very often the issue is not where am I going to go tonight to entertain myself, but rather what am I going to select to decide to do in order to do that. And last but not least, one of the great things about our city that I take full advantage of is that we have some of the best restaurants in the world and some of the best food. We have a very multicultural population, and those people have set up different kinds of restaurants, and so you can find great restaurants that span the gamut of world food worldwide, from sort of Asian to Mediterranean to European to the Far East, etc., etc.
Next slide.
Next slide, please, Alex.
So Joe, we're going to go without the PowerPoint because the PowerPoint is glitchy. It works, but it's very glitchy.
Okay.
So, is that okay?
Because we don't have a choice, do we? All right, so if you are interested in applying, how do we go about doing that? Well, first let me tell you about what our admission requirements are. Pardon me. So in order to be considered for entry to the program, you need a minimum cumulative grade point average of 3.3. Now that's on a McGill scale of 4.0. Unlike most North American universities that have a 4.3 scale, McGill has a 4.0 scale. A 3.3 average corresponds to a B+. Okay. For those of you who might be interested. In addition, you have to have at least a general background in some form of the biological sciences, so you don't necessarily have to have had an undergraduate or a graduate degree, neuroscience in particular, but you have to have had some background in related disciplines, or at least taken a number of courses where you are have been exposed to sort of biology in some sense. It also will help you in terms of admission if you have taken advanced coursework related to the field that you're interested in pursuing in graduate studies. So again, because we're so large, we get a whole variety of different students who come in with different backgrounds and different interests. We have some people who are very much interested in sort of pursuing molecular questions in the area. We have other people who are much more interested in sort of systems, higher order systems. So we have a number of students and PIs who are, doing imaging work related to memory formation, or I was going to say drug addiction. That's not true. Other sort of higher level processes. If you've got a lab background or background in research, that's a plus. Okay. And then last but not least, what you need to do in order to get admitted into the program is to secure a supervisor. And what that means is you need someone in the program who can take in graduate students, who is willing to take you into his or her lab and say, yes, this person is going to come in and work with me on this project or that project, but I am willing to act as this person's academic and research supervisor. And that is something that you need to do. We do not match students with supervisors. What we do sometimes is when we see your application and we see you're interested in a particular area, or we see that you are interested in trying to look at a particular question, we may in fact then sort of advise supervisors that there may be a match here, or that somebody who's applying that looks like they would be a good fit with your lab. But at the end of the day, you have to speak with those individuals and get their approval and take you on. And the end point of the admission process involves your supervisor actually sending us a confirmation that, yes, I am going to take this particular applicant in this student under these conditions. And I'll get to that a little bit later. If you're coming in to our master's program, so we have a master's program and a PhD program. If you're coming in with a master's specifically for the master's, you could then continue on to the PhD. But if you're thinking, first I want to do a master's before I decide if I want to invest more time in order to do my PhD, what you need to have done is to have completed, or by the time that you start our program, will have completed your undergraduate degree, that is your BSc or your BA. For the doctoral degree, you need your master's degree, or, okay, we do accept undergraduate students. People have only done their undergraduate degree directly into the PhD program, but effectively we do so under very extreme and high level requirements. That is, you need a cumulative grade point average from your undergraduate degree, at least of 3.7 or higher, again on a 4-point scale. So that corresponds to an A or A plus undergraduate degree. And you need to have had prior outstanding laboratory experience. What does that mean in terms of practicality? What it means effectively is that you need to have had roughly at least a year or so of, not full-time because you're taking courses as well, but experience, including summer experience in a lab or in multiple labs. And effectively, if you have had your name on a publication or on a paper or a poster that was presented at a conference, that would count as outstanding laboratory experience. Okay, so that's to get into the PhD. That's to get into the PhD directly from the undergraduate degree. Now, I've received a number of inquiries, as have the staff, from students who say, okay, if I apply for to the PhD 1 program, does that mean that if I don't get into the PhD 1 program, I won't get into the program at all? Or if I apply for the PhD 1 program, do I need also to apply for the MSc at the same time if I have an undergraduate degree? And the answer to both those questions is no. If you're going to apply for the PhD 1 program, you need to indicate that on the application form. Once that is there, then that application will get flagged, and then we take your application and we send it to a special committee that evaluates whether or not you have the requirements needed to come in as a PhD 1. If the answer is yes, then we will approach McGill Graduate Studies and say, we'd like to bring in this student as a PhD 1. If the answer is no, then we will consider you for the master's program. So the long story short here, and the take-home message is, if you want to apply for PhD 1 and you are an undergraduate or will have completed your undergraduate degree but not a master's degree, then apply as a PhD 1 student. But that will not disqualify you from entry into our graduate program per se. Okay. I should mention that we have a special program, and for you American listeners, you're probably familiar with this. Up here in Canada, we were the first person to implement, program to implement that in our country, but now other universities have followed suit. But we have a rotation program in which students can apply for the rotation program, and what that means effectively is that you have completed your undergraduate degree or your master's degree, and in the rotation program, rather than starting to work directly with your supervisor who's going to supervise you for your PhD work, rather what you're going to be doing is you're going to be rotating through 3 different labs. So you'll have 3 to 4 month rotations through different labs that you might be interested in working in ultimately when you start your real PhD. But then effectively the advantage of that is that, the advantage of that is that if you're not really 100% sure exactly what you would like to do as a PhD student or with whom you'd like to work, this gives you the opportunity to get a flavor for the kinds of work that the labs that you're going to rotate through does. So effectively, we have a number of students who say, look, I'm interested in doing some kind of, for example, imaging related work, but I'm not exactly sure where I want to focus my energy. I don't know if I want to put that into imaging as it relates to psychiatric disorders or imaging as it relates to neurological disorders or whatever. So what we allow you to do in that instance, if you get into the rotation program, is to actually go in and sort of, if you will, sample from each of the labs that you're rotating through. And at the end of that rotation, that's when you say, okay, this is what I want to do. The other advantage of the rotation program is you might have an idea as to what you want to do, but effectively what you want to do is to pursue that idea using multiple sort of techniques in order to get at the question you're interested at. So you might be interested in sort of learning something about optogenetics and also learning something about electrophysiology, et cetera, et cetera. So the rotation would allow you to do that as well, so that you can rotate in a lab that specializes in opto. You can also perhaps rotate in a lab that focuses on electrophysiology, and then a third lab using another technique that you may sort of want to gain mastery over. Okay? So that's the way. So the timeline for the rotation is shown in the table on the slide there. So generally in the first lab, again, it's a first rotation from September to December, and then lab 2 is January to April, and then lab 3, April to August, and then in September, that is year 2 of when after entry into the program, that's when you pick your final lab and you start actually working on your doctoral thesis project. If you're coming in as an MSc student, once you get in, here we have certain requirements. So the requirements for at the MSc level are you have one required course to take. So we have 2 core courses in our program, Principles of Neuroscience 1 and 2. I'll talk about those in a second. So if you're coming in as an MSc student, we require you to take one of our core courses, either PN1 or PN2. You could, if you'd like, take both of them. That's perfectly acceptable, but we only require one of those. And in addition to that, you take 2 elective courses in either neuroscience related or affiliated courses that you might be interested. So for example, you might be interested, for example, in ultimately at the end of the day, getting more involved in sort of education or knowledge transfer. So one of your elective courses in this case could be a graduate level course in education or communication studies, that sort of thing. In addition, MSc students are required to take one non-credited research ethics course. Okay, and this research ethics course is actually not a full semester course. It's 2 afternoon sessions in which we sort of give lectures and then follow that up with sort of a small group case studies related to issues that are important in terms of ethical research practices and standards, including such topics as authorship, dealing with subject recruitment, conflicts of interest, et cetera, et cetera. Our courses here at McGill are 3 hours per week for one semester, and usually that's about 13 weeks. I don't know why you have 15 weeks up there. Usually it's about 39 hours total. But anyways, 13, 15 doesn't make that much difference, but that's how that works. Now, our required courses, again, are Principles of Neuroscience 1 and 2. PN1 is really cellular and molecular neuroscience. So you're exposed there to all of the sort of cellular and molecular pathways and mechanisms involved in neuronal function. Principles of Neuroscience 2 is more systems oriented. So that there we deal with sensory systems, we deal with motor systems, and then we deal with sort of the higher level cognitive processes, systems like those involved in memory, motivation, reward, pleasure, pain, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, the other thing is, if you're coming in with a strong background in either molecular or systems, i.e. you've taken a number of undergraduate and or graduate level courses in molecular neuroscience, then you can apply and for an exemption from taking PN1. Okay, if you've got a strong systems background, you can apply for an exemption for PN2. If you've got a strong background in both, you can apply for exemptions in both of our core courses. And if you get those exemptions, it means you don't have to take those courses. The idea here is we don't want to have to sort of reinvent the wheel for you. If you already know the material and have demonstrated that you know the material, then we don't want to have to sort of force it down your throat a second time, if you will. But what that does effectively, so an exemption, just to let you know, is not an exemption, i.e. a reduction in their course requirements. It's just an exemption from you don't have to take a core course. So for an MSc, you still need to take 3 courses total in order to get the degree. The duration of our MSc typically lasts about 2 years. Actually, on average, I think our graduation rate for the MSc is about 2.25 years. Okay? And we have to, and there is a McGill imposed maximum of 3 years to complete your MSc. Okay? Although it is possible to get extensions to that under particular circumstances, but generally speaking, if you're not done your MSc within 3 years, then that suggests that you may not be able to complete the MSc. And the expectations for a master's thesis, excuse me, here at McGill do not involve publications. Although if you do get a publication from your master's thesis, that's clearly to everyone's benefit, because that shows you're a highly successful and productive trainee in neuroscience. But the master's thesis simply has to show familiarity with the previous work in the area that you're working in, and must demonstrate the ability to carry out your research project, to generate data set, and to organize and interpret the results appropriately according to the norms of our discipline. Okay. For the PhD program, it's a little bit different. Both PN1 and PN2 are required courses, plus 2 electives, plus the research ethics course. That being said, again, if you're coming into the PhD, you can apply for exemptions to PN1 and or PN2, but in that case, you need to take 4 courses still. But in this case, you would have the opportunity to select exactly which 4 courses you want to take. Okay. The duration of our PhD typically lasts about 4 to 5 years. There's a maximum limit imposed by McGill of 7 years. And again, our graduation rate on average, most students take about 5 to 5.5 years in order to graduate with a PhD. The expectations for a doctoral thesis are a little bit more stringent, actually a lot more stringent. So a doctoral thesis must constitute original scholarly work. And must be a distinct contribution to knowledge. And in fact, in the McGill guidelines for preparation of a PhD thesis, they require that you include a section in there saying, this is what I did for my PhD, this is what I found, and this is the reason why it's an advancement to the field, or it significantly, or it contributes to our understanding of the question that I was pursuing in my work. Okay. Again, you have to be familiar with the previous work, et cetera, demonstrate the ability to plan, carry out, and the research presented must meet current standards of the discipline, and the thesis must clearly demonstrate how the research advances knowledge in the field, which is what I just said. So effectively, the real criterion here for a PhD thesis here at McGill is originality, scholarship, and advancement of knowledge, okay, which is not the case for a master's degree. Typically, one of the things that sort of you can use to evaluate whether or not that has been achieved is if you've published your work, then that would be considered an advancement of knowledge. But that being said, okay, I don't want to give the impression that you need to publish in order to get a PhD with us. You don't necessarily. We have had students who have graduated successfully without actually publishing their work at the time that they graduated. But in that case, the expectation was of the evaluation committee is that at the very least, this work is of sufficient quality and of sufficient impact that it is publishable. So that's the criteria that we typically use, generally speaking. I'm going to skip over this because I think I already spoke about that. Okay. Now, a lot of students send us emails and say, look, I'd like to come to McGill, but I can't afford it. And so is there anything we can do? Or, are there any fellowships that I can apply for as an international student? The answer to that second question is there are a few, but they're limited, and there aren't many opportunities. The answer to the first question is no, we don't expect you to pay your own way to do your work. So we have what we refer to as our minimum stipend requirement. And this is the amount of money that you, if you're not coming in with your own fellowship, This is the amount of money in terms of supporting you financially, okay, that we expect your supervisor to sort of support you in terms of your salary. So at the MSc level, and that varies according to what category of student you are. So effectively, if you're a student who's a citizen of Quebec, which is the province in which Montreal is located, then in the first year, we expect supervisors to support you at the level of $18,150. If you're from outside Quebec, but you're a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, then that turns out to $23,000. And if you're an international MSc student, then we expect supervisors to support you in the amount of about $30,000. Now, you might ask, why are these so substantially different? And the answer to that is simply that the province enforces different tuition fees on these different category of students. So the province has the lowest tuition demands for Quebec students. It also, because Quebec is part of Canada, it will accept non-Quebec Canadians into our universities, but effectively it will ask them to contribute a little bit more in terms of tuition for that, and international students from outside of Canada will be expected to do more. So we have to focus in and have our minimum stipends vary as a function of how much tuition the different categories of students are paying. Okay, and the answer to that comes, so we've set the stipends that way. The third thing that I should mention is that effectively all of these stipends here, okay, have been set up so to indicate that after tuition fees have been paid for, that students are bringing home in their own pocket at least a minimum of $14,000 per year. And we can talk about why $14,000, but that's sort of outside of the purview here. So just because, so effectively there is a minimum take-home amount that we enforce, and that's how we effectively set up these things. Now, you might notice that for the PhD students, the stipend, so notice for the MSc students that the stipends change over year. That's because effectively the fees, for example, for international students, vary from year to year. So they're highest in the first year, they're a little bit lower in the second year, and in the third year, there are no differential international fees to be paid. For the PhD level, those are all the same, independent of the year. Why is that? Because effectively our program will pay the differential fee for international and Canadian tuition. That doesn't mean that students will not pay tuition. It just means that we will pay the differential fee component. So for the international fees, we will pay those, and then international students will pay the same tuition rate as Quebec students, and the same thing for Canadians. I hope that was clear, because sometimes it's not clear even for me, and I've been doing this for years. In terms of fellowships that are available, again, if you're an international student, there aren't that many external. So we have the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, or CHR. That's open only to Canadian citizens or residents. FRSQ is the Quebec version of CHR, which is open only, I think it's open to Canadians now as well. And so we should update that. But again, if you're an international student, you're not eligible to apply for that. NSERC is our sort of engineering and basic science research funding council, which is restricted for Canadians. The last thing is that recently, this has been about 7 or 8 years now, the federal government here in Canada has established what they refer to as the Vanier Scholarship. The Vanier Scholarship is open to any student from across the globe, okay? But it's very, very competitive. And in order to be considered for a Vanier application, you need program approval, i.e. we have to sponsor you. And in order for us to sponsor you, you need to show us that you are outstanding along 3 criteria. academically, and that means effectively a 3.7 GPA or higher. Research-wise, that is to say, you probably had some success already in terms of publications, or alternatively, you've had extensive experience in a variety of research labs. And last but not least, you need to demonstrate to us, because that's what Vanier is going to be looking at, you need to demonstrate leadership in some particular way, whether that is socially, culturally, in terms of your academics, in terms of your research. So I can tell you, for example, that some of our Vanier applicants in previous years, in terms of their leadership, have done such things as they've gone off to sort of third world, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but third world countries, and helped to build villages there, hospitals, schools. We had one of our recent graduate Vanier applicants, in fact, won it last year, spent a year actually helping sort of the Syrian migrants who left Syria when the war was going on. It's still going on, but she helped them to actually successfully migrate from their native homeland into Germany, which is where she was based. So effectively, what I take home message here is that a Vanier scholarship is a possibility for international students to apply for, but you need to really justify that application. Internally, we have fellowships that all students can apply for. So the IPN has what we call returning student awards. These are $10,000 fellowships that are given out on an annual basis to some of our students. We usually give about between 8 to 12 of those per year, depending on budgetary constraints in terms of them, but a minimum of 8. The Faculty of Medicine here at McGill also has internal awards that our IPN students can apply for, and the M&I has certain awards that are particular to IPN students, but who are pursuing their graduate studies based here at the M&I. So there's that. You can apply for foundation awards like the Savoy Foundation for Epilepsy Research. There are other ones that could be applied for. I think our website lists, runs the whole list, and if that's not enough for you, you can go on the McGill GPS Graduate Studies website, and they've got an entire list of all of the awards that students can apply for. We also support travel to conferences. So the IPN has what we call the Great Awards, which are there to fund students going off and traveling and presenting at conferences, as does the Faculty of Medicine. All right. So a lot of students are saying, okay, look, where did these stipends come from, and what exactly will my standard of living look like based on that? So on the left, if you're a Canadian, okay, so you're guaranteed a minimum of $20,000. Tuition fees currently for Canadian students are approximately $4,000. Okay? So effectively, that leaves you with $16,000 for living expenses. If you don't have a car, which most graduate students don't, then the other nice thing about Montreal is we have a relatively effective public transportation system. So you're going to buy a bus pass. That will cost you about $600 annually. And then you can get a very decent apartment for about $700 to $800 per month. And in fact, quite a good apartment at $700 to $800 per month. You can even get apartments that are less expensive than that. So $500 to $600 will get you a smaller apartment, but still something that's going to be very comfortable and livable in. So at the minimum, that means that you still have $7,000 left over for things like food, entertainment, going to things, travel back home if you need to, and so buy an airplane ticket, etc., etc. For international students, it's a little bit different, okay? But I mentioned this simply to sort of illustrate what the IPN does. So total tuition fees for an international student is about $16,500 or $16,418 to be more exact as per the table. $11,850 of that 16 actually is the international fee differential. We, the IPN, will pay for that. Okay, so effectively, you're going to be paying about $4,500 in terms of tuition. Okay, that's a little bit more than what you would be paying if you. So it's $4,560 as opposed to $4,000 if you're a Canadian. And the reason for that is effectively because the $560 comes because you have to purchase health insurance, which Canadians have, but international students don't. But the government forces all students coming in to have some form of health insurance, and so that's where the money comes in. McGill has set up a program that provides health insurance, but they will charge you for becoming part of that. So effectively, that leaves you with about $15,400. Again, the bus pass is $600. Your apartment is going to run you, let's say, a maximum of $8,400. So that will still leave you about $6,500 left over for your living expenses. I'm not going to go through the MSc student annual budget, except to say, okay, that for the international students, for the MSc, what you see there is remaining is $2,075. Okay? That's a mistake. Okay? It's actually $5,075 for reasons that I won't get into, but the IPN will in fact supplement an additional $3,000 in order to bring you up to $5,000, roughly $75. So that means that you'd be making the same thing. Again, we're a huge program. We have over 350 students. We have over 225 supervisors. And so building a sense of community. When I did my graduate studies, I did it in a relatively small program. There were a maximum, I'd say 35 graduate students. There were 8 to 10 professors who were responsible. And so building a sense of a community amongst that small group of people is not necessarily a difficult thing to do. It's a much more difficult thing to do if you've got 350 people. So one of the things we try and do is to have special events where we bring together as many people in the community as possible. And one of those events is our IPN retreat. Typically that occurs over a 2-day period in September. And there we bring in everybody. We have keynote speakers who come in. We have students presenting posters. We have multiple poster sessions. We have students who will be presenting oral sessions, in oral sessions, et cetera, and then at the end of the day, after this is all done, we have a wing-ding big knock-'em-dead party at the end of that. The other reason why I think, and as much as I'd like to take credit for this, I can't, but the other reason why I think the IPN is a really good program is because effectively we have a phenomenally great, active, and very helpful graduate student association. So GSAN, as they like to be referred to, are a group of our students who really do a lot for us. So they organize so many different things. They will organize independently of what the program itself organizes, is they will organize different research symposia. So in recent years, they've organized actually a symposium that brings together all of the students across Quebec for a 1-day symposium on neuroscience. GSAN also organizes a whole variety of social events so that people who are coming in, particularly from overseas, who may not know anybody here, you know, they try and they set up buddy systems so that at least you have somebody to talk to, or, you know, give you some advice in terms of how to adapt to the city. We've got a very strong, they have a very strong program, particularly in terms of accommodating and supporting international students. If you're interested in picking up French, they've organized, again, a program where students can come in and learn a little bit of French and practice speaking in French. They organize new events, welcoming events for all incoming students. And again, they've got the sort of mentorship or buddy program. These people are really phenomenal. They are outstanding. They make my job as a director in terms of sort of making sure that all incoming students, or as many incoming students as possible, sort of don't feel overwhelmed by coming to a new place, being imposed with a graduate degree that is admittedly challenging, et cetera, and so they're really there to sort of help you out, and I'm very grateful for that. I wake up, I should say that. I was gonna say I wake up every morning thanking Jisan. I don't actually, but I should. Okay. In addition, so a number of students also ask whether or not there are any sort of teaching opportunities in our program. So for example, are there any TA-ships? And the short answer to that is no. The IPN itself does not offer any teaching assistantships. That's not to say that our students do not get teaching assistantships. It just simply means that the way the TAs have been organized here at McGill is that they are organized at the departmental level. And again, our program is transversal across departments. So we don't have any control of TA-ships, but the individual departments do. So if you happen to come in and work for a supervisor in a department that does offer TAs, then you would be eligible to apply for those TA-ships. Okay. But that is outside of our control. Okay, so that is a departmental deliberation process, not a program process. That being said, if you're interested in developing your teaching skills or getting some teaching experience, we do have opportunities. The most perhaps valuable of those is what we refer to as our Brain Reach program. This is really a program that, again, is run primarily by IPN students, although it's overseen by the former director of the IPN, who is now the Dean of Graduate Studies at McGill, Josephine Albantaglu. And what happens in Brain Reach is that IPN students go into, on a monthly basis, so one day or afternoon per month, students get the opportunity to go into a classroom, either at the grade school level or at the high school level, and offer an afternoon session or lecture on a variety of different topics related to neuroscience. So at the grade school level, we go in and talk and show students about how the brain, what brain mechanisms are responsible for hallucinations. We give them some overview in terms of biology, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little quiz that students will give to the grade school students about, there are different pictures of brains, and you have to match the brain size to the animal. So what does a cat brain look like? What does a dog brain look like? What does a gorilla's brain look like? What does a human brain look like? Et cetera, et cetera. And you've got to match. And it's really an effective thing. At the high school level, the topics are a little bit different. So at the high school level, we actually go in, and one of the things we do is we have access to, at our local butchery, we have access to free cow brains. And so we go and we get our hands on those, and then we bring those cow brains into the class, and we have students actually dissect the cow brains and show them the different parts of the brain. This is where the hippocampus is, and the hippocampus is involved with that. We also have lectures there on sort of topics that are probably going to be more interesting to high school students. So addiction and reward, memory, that sort of stuff. Okay. Last but not least, we have a third branch of Brain Reach, which we call Brain Reach North. And this is targeted specifically to students who are living and being educated in the sort of northern regions of the province. Brain Reach North does not actually go into those schools because A, it would be exorbitantly expensive. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to go up there to do some teaching of my own, not in the context of Brain Reach, but and it was enormously expensive to get me into that place. So we can't send people up. But what Brain Reach North does is they literally set up sort of virtual training sessions, which they will then send to the teachers up there, and the teachers can use those to teach their students about brain function and neuroscience. So if you're like really interested in sort of technological aspects of education or adapting technology for educational purposes, Brainreach North would be the place for you. I'm almost done, folks. Okay. Now, a number of students also ask, you know, okay, it's up to me to secure a supervisor, so how do I do that? Well, generally speaking, here's what you can do and some of the tips that you can follow to maximize your chances of securing a supervisor. So first, you apply to the IPN, okay? And effectively your file is then uploaded to a database that we will look at and make sure that the minimum academic requirements, i.e. the GPA requirements, are there and the background. Okay. Once that happens, we will then upload that to a database, okay, that all IPN potential supervisors have access to, okay, and they can look at applications. But whether or not they're going to look at your particular application is always open to chance. So what you should do is, if you have identified a supervisor or a couple of people with whom you think you would be interested in working with, you should contact those people directly via email. Okay. Now, when you send the email should be really short and clear and precise. Don't send a 4-page email. I can tell you that most people don't have the time or inclination to read such a long email. Keep it simple, stupid. No intents offended. It's a common phrase used here in North America. So keep it simple, keep it short, make the purpose clear. Say, dear Dr. So-and-so, I went on your website and saw that you are doing this particular kind of work. I too am interested in the kind of work that you're studying, and would be very interested in pursuing or exploring whether or not it would be possible for me to pursue graduate studies under your supervision. Here are my, in addition to my interests, here are some of the skills that I have that I think would make me a valuable addition to your lab, or a good addition to your lab, or a good fit for your lab. So I can tell you, for example, I do behavioral neuroscience. Okay, I get tons of emails from students saying, dear Dr. Rochford, my name is so-and-so. I've got a background in molecular and cellular neuroscience. I've got a publication. I've got this attached as my CV. You know, I'd be more than happy to sort of come and work with you in your lab. And I look at that, I look at the CV and I go, wow, this person really is a very intriguing applicant. The problem being is that this person has no expertise that matches my expertise. So I don't do molecular or cellular, so I can't bring in a student like that, because they're going to be wasting their time if their interests really lie in molecular or cellular neuroscience. Okay. So be clear, be concise, and also indicate that you're not just fishing for a supervisor. Okay. So just don't sort of pick a random list of like 50 people and send them emails with the same email, but rather indicate that you've actually invested some time and effort investigating what these people do, and knowing what they do and how your interests jive with what they do. Last but not least, okay, not even last, you also want to include your CV so that people can refer to it. In your CV, clearly you want to indicate all of the academic and research qualifications that you have, but in addition, you might want to include things in your CV that you think might not be interesting. So any sort of special hobbies or interests that you do. Maybe you've been on a swim team and you've had lots of experience as an amateur swimmer. You've competed in some amateur events. Supervisors might look at this and go, okay, you know, swimming has nothing to do with my research, but what swimming does is it shows that this person is really motivated and is able to follow a long-term commitment to a particular objective. If you're a musician, people might see that you are a very creative or innovative person. Again, what you want to do is be specific as to why you wish you want to join this particular lab. Almost everybody has a website. Look at the website. In addition, it helps if you actually read a few of their recent papers, so you get a flavor for exactly what they're doing these days. All right, you want to sort of briefly tell people what you are hoping to gain by joining the lab, okay? And then also indicate whether or not you're interested in applying for particular awards, if you're eligible to apply for those awards. Because effectively, you might need a sponsor. If you are eligible for award, there are some fellowships where you need to be sort of sponsored by the lab director, who will write a letter saying, yep, I'm going to take this person. Why? Because I've seen their CV, I've talked to this person, I've talked to that person. They're really, really good, and so I really want them. And that will help. Okay. The other thing is that people are going to be a lot more interested in you if either you can bring in your own money or you can show them that you're interested in trying to bring in your own money, because then that means that they don't have to invest the stipend, but you have your own, if you will, financial support. Last but not least, we get a lot of emails saying, I contacted Professor X because I'm really interested in joining his or her lab, and I contacted him, and I did that 3 weeks ago, and there was no response. Okay. What do I do? Okay. Or does that mean that Professor X is not interested in taking me? The answer to that is absolutely not. It just might mean that Professor X is a very, very busy person, or in a very busy period of time, very, very busy at that time, and may not have time to sort of look at every individual that comes in. I get 75 to 150 emails a day, okay? Some of them get lost in the cracks. Some of them, have a high priority and I have to deal with them first. So if I get an email from a student saying, can I join your lab? I may not at that time have the initiative or the motivation to reply immediately. So all this to say is, don't give up, okay? If you don't hear following a first email, you can always send a reminder email a week or two later. And again, be polite, don't be aggressive or assertive, but say, Dear Dr. Jones or Dr. X, I was wondering if you had a chance to look at my email that I sent to you 2 weeks ago. If so, would you have an opportunity to discuss my candidacy for graduate studies within your lab? Again, some people won't answer. Okay. If that's the case, don't take it personally. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're looking at you going, oh, I don't want to take this student because I don't think they're very good. It just means that they're either really very busy, or more importantly, they don't at this current stage in time have any openings for a graduate student and just don't have the time to respond to that. Last but not least, we'll go to the question period where I can answer that, but if you need more information, okay, check out our website, www.mcgill.ca/IPN. We're also on Facebook, and we're also on Twitter. So that being said, I'm going to stop hogging the conversation here and open it up for questions.
Okay, so our first question is from HP, and he's asking for scholarships, etc. If you're currently not a permanent resident at the time of applying, but expect to be by the time the courses start, paperwork is currently being processed, what can you do?
You have to wait until you're a permanent resident to apply, unfortunately. Because if you apply just by saying, I should be or will be a permanent resident by the time that the evaluations occur or the fellowships are given out, that'll never get through the fellowship agencies. You have to have demonstrated proof of residency or citizenship at the time of the application. Yeah.
Ashita asks, if my master's is not in the sciences and I apply for a PhD, would my application be looked at as an undergraduate degree?
No, it would still be considered a graduate degree. However, I have to be totally honest here. If your background is not in biology, even if it's a master's degree, that may not work in your favor in terms of getting into our particular program. It doesn't mean you won't get in, but it means that you're going to have a harder time sort of maybe securing a supervisor.
A similar question. John was wondering if he's at a disadvantage as an applicant coming from computer science engineering background. He's only taken 2 bio lab-based courses and 4 chemistry, 3 lab-based courses.
Okay. It's hard for me to comment on individual cases, but I would say in this particular case, just based on what I know, if you really want to sort of continue to pursue a sort of computational-based graduate studies in our program, we have a lot of computational neuroscientists, and effectively, I think your application with those qualifications would be looked upon more favorably, at least by the computational neuroscientists. Now, if you're proposing to say, listen, I'm fed up with computers and things like that, and I actually want to get hands-on into like really live tissue, so I want to learn more about molecular biology or systems, that might be a little bit more problematic. So I guess it depends on exactly what you're interested in pursuing at the graduate level in our program would be the short answer. But it doesn't necessarily disqualify you, no. Nor would you necessarily be at a disadvantage as long as, again, your qualifications and your prior experience sort of match up with the general lines of orientation in the lab itself. So, I can tell you, this was 2 years ago now, we had an applicant who applied with an MSc in math, okay, who got into the program, but got in specifically into a lab, an imaging lab, where they were literally trying to develop sort of different pipelines in terms of analyzing the images that were coming out. And so the supervisor there looked and said, well, this person has the mathematical expertise needed in order to develop these new algorithms and pipelines. And so the student came into the program and is doing quite well, actually. So it's not a stake through the heart. Okay. The other thing you might want to consider is that McGill, and I probably should say this, McGill also has a program that we call BBME, which is biomedical engineering, which effectively is, again, getting people with an engineering background or a computational computer science background. And that program is more oriented along the lines of sort of building different prosthetics or different algorithms that are going to be useful in terms of bioengineering. So that's also an option for you. And that's a program that you might want to sort of at least have a look at in terms of what they offer and what they're looking for in terms of their graduate students.
Mano asks, can you tell us what is the IPN's acceptance rate?
That's a good question, isn't it? It varies from year to year. And in fact, okay, so there are 2 ways to answer that question. The first one being, what is the percentage of students who actually qualify or that the IPN will put on our database? Okay, and the answer to that is, I would say probably about 97%. So in terms of us giving you or exposing you to potential supervisors, you know, we don't get a lot of applications where the academics force us not to accept them. We do get some, but they're very few. So we'll put most of those applications on our own database that the supervisors can look at. But then, of course, Whether or not supervisors will take you on is dependent upon factors that are outside of our control and also outside of sometimes the supervisor's control. So supervisors may want to take people on board, okay, but can't do it because they currently don't have the funds, the research funds available to take on an additional student or a new student. So in that instance, I'm really not excited about giving a success rate for that because it does vary from year to year. But I would say, just in generally, more generally, I'd say anywhere between 25 and 40% of the students that we put to the data onto our database actually get recruited by a supervisor.
Next question. Helen asks, my CGPA on my transcript does not fulfill the requirements, but it does not include the grades I received during my exchange semester. When they are added to my CGPA, my CGPA goes much higher.
Yep.
Would that create a problem during my application?
Nope. In fact, what we require, what McGill requires, is every single mark that you've gotten at the university, whether it's exchange or not exchange. Okay? And in fact, we've had some instances where students have not included their marks or have included their marks, and we've sort of said, okay, look, let's focus on the non-exchange GPA and calculate that, and that meets the requirements. But when we factor in the exchange, that brings it below, and we can't really do anything about that because if we send it off to graduate or enrollment services, they're going to look at that and go, sorry, doesn't meet minimum requirements. So that's that. But in this case, it's the opposite. So I think, in fact, works in your favor. Put it in. Make sure you get those transcripts and that you get those marks into your transcripts or include those marks somewhere.
So next one, Kashi's inquiring, so she's a biology student at Concordia,
yep,
and she hasn't yet decided between whether she's going to do a major or an honors. And she's wondering which one would be better for the IPN.
Honors. Honors. For any kind of program at the graduate level, I would suggest that, you know, getting an honors degree is always considered by every program that I'm aware of and every PI, that professors that I'm aware of, you know, honors graduates are always considered a little bit better than majors. So I would say honors. And the reason for that is also because my understanding of most honors programs is that there is a strong research component to the honors degree. So what that means is, A, you're a really good academically strong student because, again, the program requirements for that are quite high, or the criteria to get in academically are quite high. But in addition, you know, you have to do a lot of research. And so you're going to come in with a very much, a much more strong research background relative to a majors. Now, that being said, for those of you in a majors program who are not in honors, don't panic, okay? Don't panic, because it doesn't necessarily mean that that is, you know, a stake through your heart in terms of getting into graduate studies. It's not. But then again, what I would recommend is, again, there are a lot of major programs now that have a sort of research component. I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities at the undergraduate level.
So Kristen is wondering, what is the IPN's view on students taking a gap year prior to continuing onto the MSc or PhD degree?
Okay, so taking a year off?
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I don't think that factors in at all. Okay. And okay, so, and the other thing you could do, okay, so if and when you apply, you'll notice that one other thing that we require in your application is what we refer to as a personal statement. So it's sort of a one-page description in which you tell us what your background is and what your aspirations are, and particularly, excuse me, and also why you want to pursue studies at the graduate level in neuroscience in particular. Okay. in that personal statement, if you feel that you need to justify a year away from your academic studies, you can put that in your personal statement. So you could say, look, before I started my graduate studies, I really wanted to take some time to travel or to diversify my experience, or just have a regular, normal life, if you will. So I wouldn't have my face in books 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I decided to take a year off to do all of those things. But then, I'm back now, I'm really motivated, and the year off really energized me, and I'm ready to go. So long story short is, I don't think it hurts you. But effectively, you might want to, in your application, put a little something in explaining why you took a year off. But it's not going to be looked at negatively, I think. Unless you say something like, I took a year off so that I could go off and kill lions in Africa.
So Alexandra asks, do you have suggestions about reference letters? Who should we get reference letters from?
Okay, so your reference letters should come from somebody who knows you really, really well, and in particular can comment on either your academic or your research abilities. So if you have spent time in working either as a volunteer or as a summer student in a lab, you really should get a research letter, a reference letter from the director of that lab. Okay. If the director of the research center says, look, I'm too busy to do that, then try and get a senior member of the lab to do that. So sometimes labs have sort of postdoctoral fellows who are charged with sort of overseeing sort of young recruit training. If you've worked clearly and closely with that PDF, that would be a good person to do. If you don't have access to that, then you're kind of up a creek in the following sense, is that you can only rely on people who know about your academic expertise. And in that case, I would suggest the best thing to do would be to ask for a reference letter from somebody in whose course you either have done very well, and also a relatively, if this is possible these days, a relatively small class. Okay? So I can tell you that if I get a reference letter from somebody who says, I teach undergraduate molecular biology, my class size is 450 students, Fred here took my course 2 years ago, he did really well in the course, and got an A. Right? That's not necessarily a bad letter, but it's not the kind of letter that's going to distinguish you from anybody else. Why? Because effectively, the professor can't comment specifically on you, as opposed to if you're in a class of 20 and the professor has had a lot of sort of interaction or opportunity to interact with you, and you've been able to talk more readily, et cetera, then the professor can comment more on sort of your intellectual skills, your ability to ask really exciting questions, to answer questions in a very novel and creative way. Those are the kinds of letters that are going to work better for you relative to the other letters that are possible.
Okay, everybody, we're not going to have time for all of your questions, but we're going to try to get through a few. We'll get through more.
How many more are there?
Quite a few.
Okay.
Megan asks, is there any advantage to applying early? Am I correct in when saying international deadline is in March?
Yes. Are there any advantages to get in early?
To applying early.
To apply early.
You're in the database early?
You're earlier on the database. Okay. And it gives you more time to try and secure a supervisor. Those are the two advantages.
So Ashita asks, is the IPN PhD program that is a master's leading into a PhD?
Yeah.
In other words, if you get accepted into the PhD one and do not have a master's, would you still take master's courses and earn the degree?
Could you repeat that question?
So she's wondering if you can get in as a PhD 1.
Yeah.
And earn the master's degree.
No.
No.
If you're directly into the PhD 1, you get a PhD, you don't get the master's degree. In addition, okay, I should mention that if you come in as a master's student, okay, then you have the opportunity to do something which we refer to as fast tracking, which means that after about a year to a year and a half to 2 years maximum at the MSc level, if you're interested in pursuing a PhD, okay, and not just stopping at a master's degree, we allow you to fast track into the PhD. And what that means effectively is you do not have to write an MSc thesis. Rather, what you do at that stage is you will do your transfer exam. And at the transfer exam, you say, look, this is what I've done in the year and a half, 2 years as a master's student. Here's how productive I've been. Here's my research area. This is what I've done to date. I want to pursue this and related questions in my PhD. This is what I'm proposing to do for my PhD. Please let me become a PhD candidate immediately. And if that exam is passed, you are then subsequently considered to be a PhD candidate. You are no longer considered to be an MSc candidate, but you're a PhD candidate. However, okay, what that means effectively is you will not get an MSc degree either, okay? But you will get a PhD. Okay? Point number 3 is if in those circumstances, or if you come in as a PhD student and then you've invested some time and effort, and after a year or 2 or 3 maximum, you say, you know something, the PhD is not for me, okay? So I don't think I want to pursue and continue on a PhD. What we will consider at that stage is allowing you to not fast track, but rather backtrack. So effectively what we do in this case is we say, okay, we will allow you to sort of go down a level to the MSc, use the data that you've gotten to write your MSc thesis, and then you will have an MSc degree. And that's what a backtrack is. So our program is really very flexible. And once you get in, it's flexible to the point where we try and allow students to the extent that we're able to follow their passion or lack of same. And if they decide that, you know, a PhD is not what they want to do, or at least not now, right? That you want to take some time off, or, you know, go off and get a real job where you can actually make some money, then we say, okay, fine, you've spent 2 to 3 years here. We don't want you leaving McGill with nothing. So what we can do is backtrack you, and at least you'll be leaving McGill with an MSc. Okay. And then if 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road, you decide you want to come back and do a PhD, whether it's with us or with, actually you can't do it with us, but if you want to do a PhD in another university or another program here at McGill, then you have a master's degree, and you can say, I've got my MSc. I'm applying for the PhD in your university in this program. Okay. And that the 3 years I spent at McGill were not wasted time. Okay.
Modup is asking, what if I'm interested in possibly transitioning from molecular neuroscience to systems neuroscience? How would that impact me in matching to supervisors?
Yeah, that's going to be a little challenging. Okay. Because generally speaking, you know, most lab PIs, I mean principal investigators, which is just another fancy term for professors. I would say most PIs are looking to take in students who can work with some training, with some accommodation, but work relatively quickly and get up to snuff and running relatively quickly. So I would say, yeah, that's probably one of the bigger challenges if you want to switch sort of levels of analysis. I think the way to try and do that, if that's something that you really want to do, is to see if you can find a lab that at least is pursuing a general theme that's related to your prior work. So you might say, for example, and this is just an example. So I did my master's degree looking at the pathways responsible for generating beta amyloid, for example, okay? Or something related to that. And all of your work has been in molecular. Now you're interested in sort of perhaps expanding your expertise to a more systems level, i.e. you want to start looking at pathology in actual Alzheimer's disease and looking at, systems involved in memory, et cetera, et cetera. That to me would be the way to try and make that transition. There are some people who are not going to be open to that, okay? But there are some people who will be open to that. So, it's a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it, but it is possible to do. Okay?
Next question. Kendra's asking, the IPN website says that we will hear if we will have an interview for the rotation program by approximately January 15th. Is there a better estimate of when we'll hear this, and will we hear either way?
Yes. Okay. So thank you for that question. It turns out that this year in particular, we had a substantial increase in the number of applicants for the rotation program. And we've had some delays in terms of the people who evaluate the rotation applications. It's been remarkably cold here in Canada. We've been in Montreal. We've had almost 0 Kelvin temperatures here, so it's caused everybody's brain and work habits to sort of slow down. And it was, long story short, without trying to sort of make fun of any of this, you will hear one way or another by the end of the month, by January 30th. So I can tell you right now that we are in the process of choosing the people that we are going to interview for the rotation program, and that final decision should be done within a week, 2 weeks at the max. So I beg your patience. We're getting older and slower as we go on.
The next question for Renee. Renee, if you actually go back, and we're going to post the video on our YouTube website, so you'll be able to go through the tuition and stipend part again, given that you didn't catch that. Anka's asking, is it possible to apply for funding in your first year of MSc or PhD? Most deadlines already passed for 2018.
Yep. Oh, sure. Yes, you can apply when you're a graduate student. In fact, I would say that the large majority of our awardees do so, okay, in year 1 of their graduate studies.
Ashita asks, what are the next steps in the admission process after the PI sends you the letter of understanding?
The next steps, after the PI sends you the LOU, or letter of understanding, if you agree to what's written in the LOU, then you send us confirmation that you say, yes, I accept. And then after that, we then will send your application off to enrollment services at McGill and say, we want this person to come in, i.e. accept. And then they will write the official letter of acceptance and send it to you. And then you have to confirm with them whether you accept the letter of offer from enrollment services or not. Okay.
Mano's asking, how much is pre-existing research experience a prerequisite for the MSc program?
You should have at least some. And at the MSc, it doesn't necessarily have to be in neuroscience, but you should have some experience. Okay. Now, again, I would say if you haven't been able to get into a lab or do some research as an undergraduate, at the very least, you should have taken a couple of courses in sort of research methods and or statistics, just at least to show people that you know what a control group is for, and you know what a correlation is, and how a correlation is not the same as an experimental design, for example.
So Quinn, oh,
Yep.
sorry, go ahead.
In short, if you can get into a lab, even as a volunteer, even if they're just sort of having you wash Petri dishes, that's probably better than not having it.
So Quinn is asking, is it possible to get in without a master's degree?
Into PhD?
I'm assuming he meant the program, but
Okay, yes, yeah. So, yeah, if you have an undergraduate degree, you can get into a program. So, and you can either come in as an MSc student, or if your undergraduate degree, again, is very, very strong academically and research-wise, you could theoretically apply to PhD 1. And if you don't get in as a PhD 1 student, we will still consider you for entry at the master's level. So what I'm trying to get across here, and I'm emphasizing this ad nauseum, and if I'm getting people upset, I apologize, but what I'm saying is apply for PhD 1 if you're interested and you think this is something you'd want to do. And don't worry about the fact that if you don't get into the PhD 1 program, that you won't get into the program at all. So we don't disqualify you for entry into graduate studies if we disqualify you for entry at the PhD 1 level.
Modupa is asking, what does the IPN do to prepare its students for careers?
Okay, Alex, you can answer that.
Well, Modupa, we're actually, we have non-academic career sessions where we invite former graduates who have transitioned into either the private sector or the public sector, and we bring them in, they talk about their experiences, how they transition from academics into the private sector or the public sector. There's also at McGill, there's a lot of resources. For example, career planning services offers CV writing workshops on interviewing. They do, again, various, they offer various programs and workshops and whatnot in order to help you transition, because we do realize that not everybody who graduates from the program with a doctorate or a master's degree wants to go into academia or will be able to go into academia. So there's a big push both at the institutional level and at the departmental level to prepare our students to transition into different careers.
I just want to add one more thing to that, which is one of the biggest areas of demand, I think, these days that I can see in terms of non-academic career possibilities is in the area of, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say science writing. And science writing is really sort of translating scientific discoveries so that people who aren't in research or in academia, i.e. the lay public, can sort of understand it. We've had a number of our recent graduates, I can count at least 5 or 6 or 7, just off the top of my head, who have gone into that area. Okay. And that's one of the things that McGill is trying to do. So they have workshops in terms of, how to become an effective writer / journalist, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not something that McGill has ignored, and in fact, it's something that McGill has identified as a really important thing to develop, and we have developed it both at the university level and at the IPN level.
Faranack is also asking about rotation program interviews. Faranack, Dr. Rochford addressed that a few minutes ago, so if you go back, once the video is posted on YouTube, you'll have the answer to that question.
You'll have an answer no later by the end of the month.
So would two honors, so Anka is asking, would two honors research projects be considered enough research experience for PhD one? One was in neuropsychology, the other was in neuroimaging, both done at the MNI. She has a very high current GPA, 3.7.
I would say, just off the top of my head, yes. Although, again, I am not the one who makes the ultimate decision. Okay? This is the committee members who make that. But based on past experience and the way that the committee has adjudicated applications, I would say that that particular application would have a very good chance of being admitted to PhD 1. Not that it is 100% certainty, I want to make that clear, okay? But I would say that that application would be very competitive.
Ashida's asking, will my CGPA include my master's GPA, which is not in the sciences? And is it that CGPA that needs to be at least 3.3?
Both of them need to be 3.3.
Or higher?
Or higher.
And all of your graduate transcripts are included?
Yes.
All of your transcripts, period, are included in your application?
We want to see every single mark that you have received at the university level. Actually, we don't necessarily want to see it. Enrollment Services wants to see it, so we have to want to see it as well.
Joelle, I will send you the PowerPoint to your email. If you could just send me your email, it's projects.ipn@mcgill.ca, and I'll get the PowerPoint to you. So one last question from Rashida. If you get into the PhD program, how long should you expect to be able to complete the program?
Again, anywhere between 4 and 6 years.
Okay, so we've got through all the questions. Any final questions? No.
Okay, so I just want to thank everyone. Again, if there are any questions that come up in the future that you would like answered, then you could email either Alex or me, or if it relates to admissions, you should really address those questions to our admissions officer. So it's IPN.admissions@mcgill.ca.
If you go to our website, all of the information is on.
All of the contact information for all of the different people in our staff and what they do is there. Contact the right person, okay? Or you can contact me or the associate director. Anyways, I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your undoubtedly busy days. And again, if you have any other additional questions, don't be shy.